Hello and welcome to Soulmates, Commander Abridged. This time we are doing a themed budget challenge where we build decks $50 or less using commanders with the creature type Elder Dragon. Yes, literal EDH. Going up first is James's Chromium the Mutable deck, a deck built to control the board while also enchanting Chromium with a bunch of auras to kill opponents with commander damage or infect in classic Voltron fashion. There's also a discard sub-theme going off of Chromium's ability. Second is my Palladia Mors the Ruiner deck, which is built to do two things: play dragons and swing out with them. It establishes air superiority by having the most flyers, then swoops in for heavy damage. Third is CJ's Nicol Bolas the Ravager deck, over budget and the bad guy of the table. It limits other players' resources by constricting hands with discard effects and using flicker effects to protect its own board. This deck is stepping into arch enemy territory. Last is Tom's Vaevictis Asmadi the Dire deck, a deck trying to set itself up early with a top deck manipulation scheme that is then cashed in on once Vaevictis is in play. As a backup plan, big mana fatties are included to dominate the late game. Now that we know the game plans and turn order, let's get right into it. James starts the game by playing an Arcane Sanctum, which enters the battlefield tapped and passes to me. I play a mountain, and then tap it for a Dragon Master Outcast, a card that will hopefully do something in 5 turns. I pass to CJ. CJ plays an Evolving Wilds and cracks it immediately for a Swamp, which enters tapped, passing to Tom. Tom plays a Forest, then taps it for a Fyndhorn Elves and passes to James. James plays an Island, then casts an Orzhov Signet. With nothing else, James passes to me. I untap, play a Forest, and swing Dragon Master Outcast at CJ, dealing 1 damage. He's playing archenemy Nicol Bolas, so he deserves it. I leave my mana up and pass to CJ. CJ starts his turn with a Swamp, then taps his lands for a Shrieking Affliction and a Quest for the Nilestone, paving the way for discard shenanigans.
And then I fucking mic drop and walk away.
Tom starts his turn at the land side of Kazul's Fury, Kazul's Cliffs, then plays a Lantern of Insight, making us all show the top of our decks. James reveals an Island, I reveal a Land of War Elves, CJ reveals a Merfolk Traders, and Tom reveals a Jungle Hollow. He then swings at CJ with his Fyndhorn Elves, bringing CJ to 38 life. He then passes to James. James draws his Island and reveals a Sage's Reverie from the top of his deck. He plays an Island, then casts a Cunning Nightbonder, which reduces the cost of flash creatures by 1. Having nothing else, he passes to me. I draw the Land of War Elves and reveal a mountain in its place. I play a Forest as my land for turn, and then tap 3 for a Far Wanderings, grabbing a Plains from my deck. It'll enter the battlefield tapped, but to save time while I'm looking through my deck, I swing at CJ for 1 and pass to him. CJ draws his Merfolk Traders and reveals a Rocky Tar Pit. He plays an Island, then casts an Izzet Signet, which he taps with an Island for Merfolk Traders. As it ETBs, CJ draws a card and then discards a card, drawing the Rocky Tar Pit, revealing a Swiftwater Cliffs, and discarding Highland Lake. Being now tapped out, he passes. At the start of Tom's turn, I finish searching and reveal an Outpost Siege. Tom draws his Jungle Hollow, then reveals a Grave Betrayal from the top of his library. He plays the Jungle Hollow, gaining him 1 life. Keeping some mana up, he passes the turn to James. James untaps, draws the Sage's Reverie, and reveals an Island. He plays a different Island, then casts Read the Bones. He scries 2, puts both on the bottom, then draws a Swamp and an Oromancer, and then takes 2 life. He reveals yet another Island from the top of his library, and then, not to be left out of the attack CJ Club, swings Nightbonder at him for 2 damage, then passes the turn. I untap, draw the Outpost Siege, and reveal a Dragon Lord's Servant. I play a Forest as my land for turn, and cast a Land of War Elves with it. I then tap the rest of my lands for Outpost Siege, choosing Cons in order to get impulsive draws in my upkeep. I consider swinging with my Outcast, but I opt to pass the turn to CJ instead. CJ untaps, draws his Swiftwater Cliffs, and reveals a Cold Storage from the top of his library. He plays a Rocky Tar Pit, taps 4 for a Solemn Simulacrum, which has an ETB trigger, allowing CJ to find a mountain and put it into play tapped. He then passes to Tom. Tom untaps, draws his Grave Betrayal, and reveals a Land of War Wastes. He plays an Exotic Orchard as his land for turn, and then passes to James, keeping his mana up. James untaps, draws his Island, and reveals a Lonely Sandbar. He plays a Swamp and then passes. At his end step, I show off my falafel gyro I'm trying to eat, which is hard with such short turns. I put down my gyro, untap, exile the Dragon Lord's Servant with the Outpost Siege's ability, reveal a mountain, and draw it. Then reveal a Lathliss from the top of my library. I then cast the Dragon Lord's Servant from exile, and play a mountain as my land for turn. I then play a Rapacious Dragon, which creates 2 treasure tokens upon entering the battlefield. I then pass, keeping up blockers. CJ draws his island, reveals a swamp, then cracks his rocky tar pit to find a mountain from his library, which enters the battlefield untapped. He then finally casts Nicol Bolas, which makes us all discard a card when he enters. This triggers CJ's quest for the Nile Stone, putting 3 quest counters on it. James discards an Oromancer, I discard an Unclaimed Territory, and Tom discards Kaya's Ghost Form. He plays an island as his land for turn, then passes to Tom. Tom draws his Llanowar Wastes, reveals a forest, and plays the Llanowar Wastes. At this point, CJ remembers to reveal his top card, showing off a Ravenous Chupacabra. Tom casts his commander, Vaevictis Asmadi the Dire. With a threat on the board, he passes to James, and on his end step, James taps everything to cast Chromium the Mutable at flash speed. With no responses, he starts his turn. James draws the Lonely Sandbar and reveals a plains on the top. He plays an island as his land for turn and passes to me. I untap and on my upkeep take 3 to CJ's Shrieking Affliction due to only having 1 card in hand, and I make a 5/5 dragon token with Dragon Master Outcast's ability. I then exile Lathliss from the top of my deck, reveal and draw a Naya Panorama, and forget to reveal the next card before playing the Naya Panorama as my land for turn. I then tap 4 lands and a Llanowar Elves to pay for Lathliss from exile. I then enter combat and swing my Rapacious Dragon at CJ, who blocks it with Nicol Bolas. Before damage, I crack my 2 treasures and tap my plains to play Naya Charm, dealing 3 damage to Nicol Bolas. In response, CJ casts a Release to the Wind, targeting Nicol Bolas, which James counters with a Dovin's Veto. With the stack now clear, both Nicol Bolas and Rapacious Dragon die, and I'm reminded to reveal my top card, which is brought back. I then pass to CJ. CJ draws his Ravenous Chupacabra, reveals an Archfiend of Ifnir, and plays the Swiftwater Cliffs as his land for turn, gaining him 1 life. He taps 4 to play Ravenous Chupacabra, which targets Vaevictis. CJ, now making enemies with everyone at the table even more, passes to Tom, who wants that revenge. Tom draws his forest and reveals another forest. He plays the forest as his land for the turn, then taps 5 lands and his Finhorn Elves for a Dragon Lair Spider. Unfortunately, he can't do much else, and with great sadness in his heart, he passes the turn. On his end step, James casts Chemister's Insight, drawing the plains and revealing and drawing Ambition's Cost. This triggers Tom's Dragon Lair Spider, which creates a 1/1 insect token on his board. James then reveals an Esper Charm, and then draws it at the beginning of his turn. Dramatic Rescue is then revealed from the top, and he plays a plains as his land for turn. As he's thinking, and to save time, I crack a Naya Panorama to put a plains onto the battlefield from my library. James taps 4 to play Ambitious Cost, drawing Dramatic Rescue, throw a Retainer, and a Diabolic Tutor. He takes 3 life and reveals an Ethereal Armor from the top of his library. James taps the Arcane Sanctum for a black in order to play Throw Retainer, which enchants Chromium. At this point, I am done searching through my library and reveal a Cultivate from the top of it. James enters combat. In order to avenge Tom's Vaevictis, he swings Chromium at CJ, dealing 8 commander damage to him. He then passes to me. At the beginning of my upkeep, since I have no cards in hand, I take 8 damage due to CJ's Shrieking Affliction and Quest for the Nile Stone. I make another 5/5 dragon token with Outcast, and then I exile the Cultivate, revealing and drawing a Blighted Woodland. I then reveal Udvara Hellkite from the top of my library. I play the Blighted Woodland as my land return, then cast Cultivate from exile, making Tom another insect token. I grab a plains for the battlefield and a forest from my hand, forgetting once again to reveal the top card of my library. I enter combat and swing a dragon token and Lathliss at CJ for 11 damage, which CJ takes, going to 17 life. I then pass to CJ. CJ draws his Archfiend of Ifnir and completely forgets to reveal the top card of his library. He casts a Burglar Rats, making all of us discard a card. Tom discards a Terminate, I discard a
Forest,
and James discards a Diabolic Tutor. He then casts Nicol Bolas once again, making us all discard for the second time. I have nothing to discard, James discards a Dramatic Rescue, and Tom discards a Butcher of Malakir. Tom also makes 2 more insects from CJ casting 2 spells. With nothing else, CJ passes the turn to Tom. Tom untaps and takes 3 damage to Shrieking Affliction due to only having 2 cards in hand. He draws a card, then reveals an Arbor Elf from the top of his library, and then CJ remembers finally to reveal the top card. It's a Dimir Signet, by the way. Tom taps out for a Great Betrayal, showing he's ready to steal some creatures, and then passes to James. On Tom's end step, James casts an Esper Charm in order to draw 2 cards. He draws Ethereal Armor and a Demonic Embrace, then reveals a Helm of the Ghast Lord, which he draws during his draw step. Phyresis is then revealed from the top. He plays a Lonely Sandbar as his land for turn, and then Tom, again reminding me to reveal the top card of my library, which is a Fertile Ground. James then casts Helm of the Gas Lord, which enchants Chromium, pumping him up and giving him card draw and discard effects when he deals combat damage. He then enters combat and swings Chromium at CJ, this time for 10 commander damage. He takes all of it, going to 7, and discards nothing because he has no hand. James draws Phyresis, revealing a Mortify under it, and then he passes to me. At James's end step, I crack my Blighted Woodland, getting a mountain and a forest into play. I then reveal an Urban Utopia from the top of my library. During my upkeep, I take 8 damage from CJ's enchantments, and I make another dragon token. I exile Urban Utopia, and I reveal and draw Udvara Hellkite, then revealing Kargan Dragon Rider. I then tap 5 for Udvara Hellkite, and head into combat. Swinging 2 dragon tokens in Lathlas at CJ, on attack, I get 3 6/6 dragon tokens from Udvara Hellkite. Hellbent CJ dies, and just like that, the table switches its target to me. During my second main, I cast Urban Utopia from exile, enchanting my untapped mountain, giving Tom another insect. I draw Kargan Dragon Rider thanks to the Utopia, and then reveal a Spit Flame. After that, I pass the turn to Tom. Tom untaps and activates the Lantern of Insight to shuffle his own library in hopes of getting something good for his draw. He then draws for the turn and plays a forest as his land for the turn. He then taps out to play a Vaevictis and then passes to James. At the end of Tom's turn, James casts Chemister's Insight from his graveyard using its Jumpstart ability by discarding an Ethereal Armor and tapping 4. He draws 2 cards to start his turn, plays an Exotic Orchard as his land for turn, and then casts Phyresis, enchanting Chromium, giving it Infect. He then casts Sage's Reverie, which also enchants Chromium, and then allows him to draw for each enchantment on him, this number being 4. He then taps 3 for a Demonic Embrace, again enchanting Chromium, making him big enough for an unblockable Infect kill. He discards Righteous Authority in order to activate Chromium's ability, making him a base 1/1 unblockable Hexproof human, and then enters combat. With 12 Infect/commander damage, he swings at me, who has no response except death. He then passes to Tom, and since Vaevictis' ability targets a creature, and James can give his commander Hexproof just by discarding a card, Tom sees the writing on the wall and concedes to James. There was definitely a lot to be worried about this game. Tom's setup was definitely worrying, even if he never got to pop off with it or swing Vaevictis. Knowing what was on top of our decks and the ability to steal or sack stuff with Grave Betrayal was nothing to sleep on. James keeping mana up, coupled with a bunch of draw spells and Chromium's ability, made for a foe who waited for the right opportunity to swoop in. I went all in on Flyers, which had the potential to completely overtake the board state, and of course, how can we forget the hand-disrupting, over-budget antics of archenemy CJ, who had us all targeting him before the game even started. All in all, fantastic EDH from all parties.